So, to business. We start with a keynote from Mike Schanker, EVP Strategy at Coupa, and our subject is conquering today's confidence crisis, multiplying margins amid uncertainty and change. Hi Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well today. How are you?
Yes, really good. Thank you. Really good. We had a fantastic first day of the show and you have the honour of starting us off on day two. Fascinated to hear this. Sounds a very interesting subject. So as they say, the virtual floor is all yours and I'll be back with some questions at the end.
All right. Sounds great. Well, let me try to unpack this. What am I talking about? Today's confidence crisis. Let's start with that. And then we'll talk about the fact that everybody thinks AI is the solution to everything. And hopefully in the next 20 minutes, we'll talk about whether or not it is. So I think it all starts with change. I could go through a long list of the kinds of changes that we've all experienced in the last few years: inflation, economic disruptions, geopolitical challenges. Depending on where you are in the world, it's got different impacts on you. But what it's meant for all of us as supply chain and procurement professionals is more work and more complexity to deal with. Now, the good news is it means that there's more of a spotlight on our part of the organization, but it does raise the bar in terms of what we need to do to deliver against that change. And so you've got different kinds of questions being asked these days. Like the CEOs might be asking, hey, do we need to fundamentally change our business model? That's that level of disruption that you may be dealing with depending on what organization and industry you're in. The CFO is trying to figure out, how do we free up money potentially to invest in new opportunities? And there's a way to do that without just having to cut heads. In procurement and supply chain, you're doing what you always do, trying to figure out the right balance. Hey, how do we find suppliers that have the price, speed, sustainability combination we want? Or on the supply chain side, you're always trying to balance cost and time and risk and trying to figure that out. Meanwhile, the person tasked with sustainability in your organization is trying to figure out, is there a way that we can hit our sustainability goals and hit our profitability goals at the same time? And oh, by the way, they're also trying to figure out, how do I get enough attention from my procurement and supply chain colleagues to accomplish both at the same time? And so with all these questions and with all this change going on, what we see in talking with a lot of our customers is that this combination of external pressures brought on by changes and internal efficiencies that, let's face it, most organizations have, it's eroding margins, and sometimes in a way that is subtle and isn't seen every day. But the net result is that most companies find themselves in a margin erosion zone. Now, what do I mean by that? As it says in the graphic, there is a gap between your optimal operating model and where most of you are actually operating today. And so the question you should be asking yourself is, okay, great, but what could we do to close that gap? And that's really what we want to spend time talking about today. So how do you get out of the margin erosion zone? Isn't AI the answer? That's what everybody is talking about these days. Every conversation, well, whatever your problem is, could we just use AI to solve that? And it is a question mark, but let's just get rid of the question mark and say AI does need to be part of the answer. But I would submit that it is a necessary but not sufficient condition to success. So let's talk about, what are all the conditions of success? How do you get out of this margin erosion zone? How do you move from feeling uncertain and not that confident about your organization's operating model and get to a place where you're feeling more confident? So my advice is look for margin multipliers. And you're thinking, great advice, Mike. I have no idea what a margin multiplier is. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Here's how I think about margin multipliers. There's a couple components. The first component is you need to be thinking about comprehensive action across your organization. That means across your supply chain, procurement, and finance functions. There are lots of silos. You need to find ways to break down those silos and make sure that the actions that you're taking every day are impacting the actions that others in your organization are taking every day, so you can maximize that impact. And then if you do that, and you can do it based on collective intelligence and collective experience, you combine those two things, you've got yourselves a margin multiplier. And the great thing is AI is really the key to unlocking this, right? You can harness it like never before. Collective intelligence and experience. 10 years ago, how did you get collective intelligence? When you were faced with a challenge in your supply chain or procurement day-to-day role, you would pick up the phone or send an email, ask a colleague. Now, you can rely on technology that might be based on a huge amount of data that's been harnessed over a long period of time on which AI can be trained. And when you do that, you get margin multipliers. Margin multipliers can come in several shapes and sizes. This is not even a comprehensive list, but here's some examples of what we're talking about. Growth multipliers. If you can find ways to save money but free up those funds to fuel growth, you've got yourself a growth multiplier. A productivity multiplier, when you can make your employees more productive. Efficiency multipliers, when you can find a better cost structure for your organization, help it run more efficiently. Sustainability multiplier, if you can find ways to reduce that carbon footprint, if you can find ways to better identify and act upon more diverse and inclusive supplier bases, you're having an impact on sustainability. And then finally, resiliency. Everyone in supply chain, we've been using the word resiliency for years, and from what I can tell in my conversations, that word is not going out of style anytime soon. That is still what people are trying to build. How can you understand when there are disruptions? The slide says volatile conditions. All of you are sitting there thinking, yeah, that's every day we've got volatile conditions, right? So these are the kinds of margin multipliers that are possible. And just to make it tangible, and so you all feel like I'm not just making this stuff up, let me give you some real world examples with some Coupa customers. Novo Nordisk looked across their source to pay processes, and they were trying to identify savings opportunities because they knew they had a lot of strategic initiatives that they wanted to fund as a pharmaceutical company. And any of you that have been following how Novo Nordisk has done the last few years know that that 45 million euros that they saved in 1 year to reinvest in research and development has paid off an order of magnitude, or maybe 2 orders of magnitude beyond that. That's what a growth multiplier looks like. Procter & Gamble, they're in a business that can sometimes be low margin. They want to drive operational efficiencies. They want to streamline their processes across supply chain, procurement, and finance. This is that comprehensive action that I was talking about. And in doing that, they've saved billions of dollars in the last several years operating on a source-to-pay platform, and they've been able to drop those savings to the bottom line. onsemi, trying to reduce supply chain risk, they were able to have supply chain decisions that would take them 2 to 3 weeks to make the decision and execute against it. And now they can make the same kinds of decisions in 1 to 3 days. You can imagine that in a volatile supply chain environment, there's a huge amount of resiliency that is built into results like that. And then finally, on the ESG and sustainability side, Microsoft has driven a sustainability multiplier. They've been able to reduce their carbon footprint in their hardware supply chain by more than 60% to date, and they're not done yet. So these are just a few quick examples in the amount of time we have. There's lots more detail behind that, but I just want to illustrate the point that these margin multipliers are not theoretical. They are practical. They are actual results that you can get. So let me talk some more about AI, because you can get these margin multipliers, and I said AI isn't enough, but you definitely need it, and not just any AI. And I just want to take a moment to say, I understand every vendor that you talk to these days is talking about AI like it's the answer, it's the solution to all your problems. And so I want to make sure that you can be an educated consumer of that content. Really think about what kind of AI and why does it matter? Right? The best AI runs on the best training data. And so what does training data look like? I'll just give an example with Coupa, and then you can compare, contrast. But we've got $6 trillion of historical spend built up over 15 years, over 10 million suppliers and buyers interacting in those 15 years. And so that level of data Training AI means that when the AI is used for practical purposes within a supply chain or a source to pay or finance function, it's well informed to try to sift through large data sets and make decisions. So you want to make sure that whenever people are telling you AI is the answer, ask questions around it. What kind of AI are you using? What kind of data set is it trained on? Where did you get that data set? Is it customer permissioned, like it is at Coupa, to be used in an anonymized and aggregated way? Are you scraping it off the internet? A lot of you have seen some of the controversy that OpenAI has been in based on some questions about where they've actually gotten their data in the past and whether they have rights to it. So you want to make sure that you understand all of these things. And then the applications are there to support it. In the case of Coupa, we think about it philosophically as AI should be embedded in the processes throughout the platform and throughout the application layer, because that's where your business processes lie, and your AI should be embedded within your business processes. Let me just give some examples of, again, what this could look like in the real world. Instead of customer examples, I just want to give you some business process examples, because I talk about embedding AI through your business processes, taking comprehensive action. Here's what it could look like. For example, a growth multiplier. You're trying to do cost and margin control. Your procurement team is launching new catalogs. You've got verified suppliers, pre-negotiated rates. That's the kind of stuff you do all the time. But now you can apply AI-powered intake so that when your end users are going through the requisition process, AI can look at past patterns of that individual or other individuals in that same role. You're in marketing, oh, you might be looking for these things. You're probably looking for software or services. Whatever that is, AI can make that process more efficient. Then you can further automate your invoicing, your approval workflow, cycle times, driving more operational efficiency. And if you're pulling together spend and payments, again, comprehensive action, even virtual card payments, you do a better job with cash flow. You can identify further savings opportunities. What's the result of all that? You can get rid of budget overruns. You can maximize your on-contract spend. And faster time to value in your organization means that you've driven more margin that can be reinvested in your business as a growth multiplier. Another example that some people in this conversation may have experienced personally. You got a bank failure. This happened to a lot of us based in California. One of your bank partners is collapsing. Your finance team is able to quickly view your banking limits and exposure policies because you've got all that information in one place. Then they've got to talk to your accounts payable team. Can you quickly figure out which payments need to be updated and maybe not routed through that bank? Your suppliers are nervous about whether or not they're going to get paid. They can self-service in the Coupa supplier portal. They can redirect payments to the new banks to make sure that there's not an issue with sensitive payment details. And more importantly for them, they want to make sure they're actually getting paid, because all this is done in a coordinated way. Your cash management team can move things around very quickly. And the end result is you've built more resilience into your business. Even though you had what could have been a catastrophic event, you were able to very quickly make the changes that were needed for your business. Couple more examples. Cumbersome AP process. That sounds familiar to anyone listening in that's worked in procurement and accounts payable. Lots of AP teams have found themselves in the past overwhelmed with paper invoices, manual processes, and people telling them they have to do more e-invoicing. That could be a mandate from the CFO because they want an efficiency multiplier. In a lot of European countries, it's actually a government mandate around e-invoicing. And so AI really has been able to make great strides in the kind of match rates that you can get, the kind of digital invoicing efficiencies that can be driven are really orders of magnitude over what technology could do even 3 years ago. It's really impressive stuff. And if you've got compliance as a service, you can make sure that whatever the country requirements are around invoicing can be automatically validated in the system. Which means you can pay these invoices directly. You've got lots of payment rail options, and you can encourage your suppliers to go digital as well, because they should generally like early pay discounts. They offer those discounts for a reason. If you take advantage of them, you can use it as the carrot and stick. Hey, if you transact with us digitally, send us digital invoices, we will pay you faster. That's how you can start driving change, driving more efficiency. And so when you're doing that, another place that AI has an impact in this end-to-end process is AI-driven fraud detection. You think about the sheer volume of data points that are out there on a network like the Coupa community. No human can discern the patterns. AI, that's what it does all day, every day, without complaint, without getting tired. It vigilantly looks across all that data, identifies suspicious patterns, and allows humans in the loop to make a determination ultimately on whether or not it's fraudulent. And so when you're driving this kind of end-to-end AP automation, you're driving an efficiency multiplier. We've seen huge efficiency gains for a number of customers that previously had cumbersome manual processes. It's a story I hear all the time. Off-contract spend reduction, something that procurement professionals are always trying to work on. Well, AI can help, right? AI can surface these kinds of opportunities of where you should look for off-contract spend. You can look at suppliers, you can look at the spend categories, you could look within expenses if you have it all as one comprehensive platform, so you can understand where the spend is happening and whether it's happening on contract or off contract. Is it happening with the suppliers you want it to happen with, or is it happening with high-risk suppliers? Again, when you've got an end-to-end view across source to pay, you can better understand these data points. And that lets AI look through 10 million plus suppliers and identify the risk, not just the risk that you as an organization may have experienced, but if any customer across the Coupa community network has experienced issues with that supplier, that gets factored into an AI-based risk score that can then flag for you when a transaction might be about to happen. You might want to think twice before you work with a supplier, or you're negotiating a contract with them in a sourcing event. You may want to insert certain clauses into the contract based on this risk score to make sure that you're covered. There's so much more that you can do within sourcing to really optimize this. And this is where very fancy math and very fancy AI can really help you further optimize the process. You can use AI in contract creation. It's a great use case in contract lifecycle management. Bulk uploads, contract creation, AI-based summaries of what contracts actually say. There's a whole bunch of things you can do that are going to drive a lot of productivity for your employees. And so all of this is a way to stay ahead of the competition, whether you're onboarding suppliers, whether you're looking across the supply chain. You can really make sure that you're keeping an eye on things from a risk and a performance standpoint across the supply chain, making all of the individuals in your organization more productive. One last example, sustainability multiplier on ESG risk and compliance. Let's say you've got a new legislative mandate. Happens all the time. Europe just passed one a couple weeks ago related to sustainability, the EU corporate directive on due diligence. And so as these things come, you can benchmark against what others are doing. You've got a large number of suppliers and other buyers on the network, and you want to know, hey, maybe I've set targets, but how am I doing against those targets? Instead of on a relative basis, you can actually compare to how other people are doing to know whether you're going slow or fast relative to everyone else, and maybe you can learn something from that. You can easily amend contracts with the help of AI to identify those areas and those relevant contracts so that when you need to insert these specific ESG-related clauses, again, maybe because of a new regulatory requirement, you can do that in an easier way than you would have in the past when it would have been a very manual and laborious and time-consuming thing to do. Talked about this earlier, but the monitoring of supplier risk in real time, you can get alerts, you can get dashboards, you have this stuff flagged to you because the AI, again, is always working in the background, flags to you, to a human in the loop, what should you be doing? What's the right prescriptive next step? How can it augment you and make you better? And so that's what sustainability multipliers can look like in terms of driving further progress across sustainability and ESG goals, which can drive not just ESG goals, but really a competitive advantage depending on what industry you're in. Really quick, the Coupa commercial, Coupa by the numbers. And the only reason I go through this is just to give you a sense of how much data we're working with. I mentioned the 10 million or more suppliers and buyers, 15 years of this permission-based spend management data, which drives the 6 trillion that I referenced earlier. A couple other things that would be interesting to you: 3 billion AI-informed predictions annually happening across our network. And every time the AI makes a recommendation to a human and then sees whether that human accepted it and what the outcome was, or whether they rejected it and did something different, the AI learns, the AI gets smarter. That next prescriptive insight is that much more thoughtful, that much more accurate, which is why we're driving around $38 billion a year in bottom line business impact for our 3,000 plus customers. And so I want to close now with a Coupa commercial, but with some key takeaways, some things for you to think about, and maybe these are things we'll talk about in the Q&A. Use technology as an enabler to break down silos across your organization. But if any vendor tells you your technology is going to solve your problems, they're underestimating the change management that's involved and what it takes to change from manual processes to more automated processes, what it means to get your employees to be comfortable with AI and prescriptive insights and actually using that and accepting it as part of their daily job. And that gets to the key takeaway number 2, right? Apply AI within the context of your business processes. Don't let it be a separate thing. A lot of you may have AI task forces running around your organization saying, what are you doing for AI? What are you doing for AI? And they want you to get involved. And it's great to get involved, and all of us should be thinking about the impact AI can have. But for me, if it's not relevant to your business processes, if it's not helping you do your job better, more productively, if it's not driving some kind of a margin multiplier, then what's the point? Don't get distracted. You've got enough to do already. And the third one, and this is, let's say, a personal comment rather than a Coupa endorsed comment, but I think that AI has tremendous potential to augment human productivity rather than replace us. And maybe 10 years from now, maybe they will, but everything I've read, all the conversations I've had with people that were much smarter than me around AI say that it'll be a really long time before those Terminator kinds of things happen. But in the meantime, we've already been using AI for years at Coupa to automate tasks and to do simple things like benchmarking and discern patterns. More recently, we're using it to augment human productivity to make prescriptive insights. The next step that we're starting to move towards with our customers that are comfortable with it now is more autonomous processes. But even when there are autonomous processes, most people are still comfortable having a human in the loop. No one's going to just let AI go run their procurement or their supply chain. And with that, I will stop sharing and we can move to Q&A.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. Now, I've got colleagues who are currently at Coupa Inspire in Vienna, and the word I've been hearing back, well, there's been 3 words coming back, and that's make margins multiply. I think it's possibly branded on absolutely everything in that building at the moment, so I had a sneaking suspicion that might come up in your presentation. So let's dig into it a little bit, because one thing I'm always fascinated about is there are so many exciting solutions and tools coming onto the market at the moment, such as yours, all the developments, all the changes, all the additions. The key thing for me is the implementation of them and making sure people are getting the best out of them. What advice would you have for anyone who is considering upgrading their solutions, changing their solutions, wanting to make sure they're getting the best out of them? How do you go about doing that? Because if you're not doing that, you may as well not have upgraded.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge that a lot of people are dealing with. And I'll confess, I am actually at Coupa Inspire in Vienna as well, and I've had a lot of those conversations over the last couple of days. I think, the 2 key things that I have in conversations around this, the first one, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, is never underestimate the change management. And then the second one is make sure you understand, if you're upgrading, if you're going for the new solution, the shiny new thing, understand what is it that you're trying to get out of it. And what I mean is, what's the business outcome? What's the result that you want to get? And if a conversation between you and your colleagues and potentially a technology vendor, you can't clearly identify what is the different outcome that you're going to get, whether it's by applying AI or buying a new point solution or anything else, if you can't understand that, don't do it yet. Make sure you understand what's the result, and then make sure you understand how are we going to get there. Are our employees ready to adopt this? Do we have experts that can help us do this? Because if you can't do that, if you can't solve the change management problem, the greatest technology in the world is going to sit on the shelf and not get used. And more importantly, frustrate your users at a time when there's a war for talent.
Absolutely, and as you were saying in the title of this about multiplying margins amid uncertainty and change, my word, there's a lot of uncertainty. My word, there's a lot of change at the moment. I think that was bordering on an understatement in the title. For you, how vital is it that enterprises are absolutely on their game when it comes to their technology choices? Because if you're not, that's where you've got the chance of falling behind. This is where you can find your advantages. How critical is it that everyone is making sure they are absolutely on point with their technology?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we think it's critical. And we actually had a presenter today who's a futurist, not a psychic, but a futurist. And he talked about the future of AI. And he challenged people in the room to think about this idea that whatever industry you're in, the technology choices you make and the choices around AI you make could fundamentally change your industry in the next 3 to 5 years, and certainly in the next 10 years. And if you don't make those right choices, if you don't find the right technology partners that have a similar view to you on where technology can enable your business processes and your organization, you're going to fall behind, and you may want to look for a new company to work for when they fall further behind the competition.
And one final question for you. I do appreciate your time. I appreciate you're at one of your busiest events of the year, so we are very grateful for that, for joining us. But what I want to know is, you're speaking to a lot of your clients, customers, colleagues at the moment at your event today. What's the chat over the glass of wine? What's the chat over the cup of coffee? What's the mood at the moment? What are people battling with? What are the challenges? Give me some of that anecdotal stuff that you've had over a cup of coffee by the water cooler, that kind of thing. What's the chat today?
Yeah, it's disappointing because no one at all is talking about the NBA finals that are starting soon. I guess that's what happens when an American goes to Europe. But really, a lot of the chatter is around AI. No surprise, right? People are talking about the impact on their industries, and we're talking about AI, and frankly, we're talking about the geopolitical disruptions that are happening, right? Being on the European continent, the Ukraine-Russia conflict is very close to home for folks. It's not just a theoretical thing. And the impacts that has had, the impacts of some of the unwinding of the post-World War II international trading order. So what does it mean to have a policy where you got all your supply of key manufactured items in China? Do you need to move those? Do you need to have a second source of suppliers, or do you need to actually move from China into Vietnam or the Philippines or somewhere else? You've got a lot of companies thinking about how they need to rethink their supply chains. And then, of course, they're hoping that AI in some way can help with that, because when you think about having to completely rethink your supply chain or the suppliers you work with in any given category of spend, it can be a bit overwhelming. And the question is, hey, I mean, in this case, they're asking, what can Coupa do? But really what they're asking is, how can technology help me make those choices less overwhelming? How can I make better decisions? And how can I be more efficient in the way I do that? And then, of course, everyone's saying, hey, how can I be a margin multiplier? Because as you said, it's pasted everywhere around them.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, if we had time, I would ask you for your views on the NBA finals, but I'm afraid we're up to time, so I can only apologise for that. Mike, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate you giving up a few minutes for us here at Procurement and Supply Chain Live New York.
No worries. Thanks for your time today.
Absolute pleasure.